The battle over gay marriage moves from the ballot box to the Supreme Court. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lee Webb.
And I'm Wendy Griffith. The High Court was expected to take up the issue just weeks after voters backed same-sex marriage in 3 states and defeated a ban in a 4th.
However, they did not address it today, taking up other cases instead.
A big question is, when they do, what could it mean for the traditional definition of marriage? Mark Martin has tonight's top story.
The Supreme Court faces the argument that the institution of marriage should be redefined, that the Constitution gives people the civil right to marry regardless of sexual orientation. Voters in 31 states have amended their constitutions to prohibit homosexual marriage, with North Carolina being the most recent in May. Voters also banned same-sex marriage in California by supporting Proposition 8, but federal courts struck it down. That ruling is on hold while the issue is being appealed. If the High Court rules in favor of gay marriage, that could lead to the overturning of every state constitutional provision and law banning same-sex marriage. Pro-family activists say it's really a fight for the youth of the country.
It's all about education of children. That's what it really boils down to. It's about the redefinition of the word marriage so that it can be taught in the public schools as a normal sexual lifestyle.
It's taught in the schools to young children. People who believe that marriage is as God designed it are punished, they're sued, they're brought before human rights commissions. There's all kinds of consequences that befall us.
Same-sex marriage is legal or will be soon in 9 states and the District of Columbia. Homosexual marriage supporters are also challenging the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, which President Bill Clinton signed into law in 1996. DOMA defines marriage for all purposes, including federal benefits, as between a man and a woman. 4 federal district courts and 2 appeals courts have overturned the provision. The Obama administration announced it no longer would defend DOMA. Republicans in the House have stepped in to defend the law in court. Any homosexual marriage cases probably would be argued before the Supreme Court in March, with a decision expected by the end of June. Mark Martin, CBN News.
And for more on this, we're joined now by Thomas Peters. He is the Cultural Director for the National Organization for Marriage. And Thomas, talk a little bit, if you will, about Proposition 8 in California and how it could impact the rest of the nation if the High Court were to take on the constitutional ban voted for by Californians.
Surely. Well, first of all, we do hope that the Supreme Court takes up Proposition 8 and overturns these federal court decisions saying that the people of California, 7 million people who voted to protect marriage, don't have a right to do that. Obviously, we hope the Supreme Court rules in their favor and says that states and people do have the right to protect marriage. If the Supreme Court were to not take up the case, then gay marriage would be the law of California once again, and that would set a hugely bad precedent for other states moving forward.
Tell us about DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, and why it's important for the rest of the country if the court were to strike it down.
Sure. Well, the Defense of Marriage Act serves several purposes. It's important to understand that these various lawsuits against DOMA really only talk about Section 3, which says the federal government has the right to define marriage as a union of one man and one woman. And so if Section 3 were to be struck down by the Supreme Court, it would allow states that have gay marriage to ignore federal law and to say that federal law doesn't apply to them. Now, the federal government has a long history of being involved in the definition of marriage. Back to the 1880s, Congress told the state of Utah, or what wanted to be the state of Utah, that before they could come in to join the union, they would have to introduce state bans on polygamy. So there are many good reasons for the federal government to protect marriage, and that's what DOMA is designed to do.
Thomas, if you will, tell me the sense of how you all are feeling in terms of your attitude at the National Organization for Marriage. Obviously, the November election was not kind to your organization. As we mentioned, 3 states approved same-sex marriage. Do you all feel like maybe you're trying to stop an avalanche here with a picket fence?
No, not at all. I think the future of the pro-marriage movement is bright, and I think it's very interesting to look at the contrast between how a lot of pro-gay marriage advocates claim that there's something like a constitutional right to gay marriage, but if you actually look at their legal arguments, they're far more humble and modest. And actually just today, a federal judge in Nevada pointed out that those state victories for gay marriage point out that the states have a right to figure out this question for themselves, and that we don't need the Supreme Court to introduce any fundamental new rights in the Constitution, including the absurd right to same-sex marriage. And so we think that, when all is said and done, marriage will have a good day at the Supreme Court, and that's why we're really looking forward to seeing them take up both these cases.
Thomas Peters with the National Organization for Marriage. Thomas, thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.